Hello everyone, let's review the results of August's 3-card blind main event tournament. This month was one of the craziest events we've ever seen in the format. Edge of Eternities brought with it one of the most powerful 3-card blind cards of all time, Eumidian Hatchery, which had a profoundly warping effect on the meta, so much so that this month looks nothing like the months before it. This card also stirred up an incredible amount of controversy in the community. But for all of the turmoil that the card caused, the silver lining here is that the excitement around the card drove lots of new players to the format. This was the highest number of players we've ever seen participate in the main event, 367, among which we saw 152 brand new players to the format. It is really exciting to see this high level of engagement with the event. I'd like to offer a warm welcome to all of our new players and say thank you to both our veterans and novices for making this month a memorable one. I hope you all stick around for next month because the excitement certainly doesn't end here. Among the 367 decks submitted, we saw 232 unique decks. Unsurprisingly, if we weigh the cards in these decks by their performance and run them through the Simpsons Diversity Index, we will see that this month was a substantial drop-off in diversity compared to prior months. This was the least diverse meta that we have seen since June of 2024, which for reference was the first month where Modern Horizons 3 was legal in the format. Having a meta that hinges entirely around one incredibly powerful card is unquestionably a major issue for format diversity. The 3-card blind diversity grade for this month was a C. Now generally I structure these videos where we spend a small amount of time reviewing the meta and a greater amount of time talking about the winners and diving into the nuances of the winning decks. However, this month's meta was well defined with a very small number of viable decks. This means we can dive a little further into the nuances of this meta because we can get a much more clear picture of how this meta operated without even discussing our winners. As a bit of a spoiler though, this month we had 17 pods of players and 15 of those 17 pods saw a Eumidian Hatchery deck take the first place position. So not only was Eumidian Hatchery the most popular card this month, occupying nearly a quarter of the meta, it also managed to dominate the format across all levels of play. There were some other key players to this meta though. We saw some extremely significant unbans come into effect this month. First, let me just say that Baron Glory, Rishadenport, and Energy Field were completely edged out by Eumidian Hatchery, Chancellor of the Forge, and Dark Depths. In basically any other month, Energy Field and Rishadenport being unbanned would be a huge deal and have a large impact on the meta, but this month was anything but normal. The most popular deck this month was Chancellor of the Forge, Foil, and Island. This classic and disruptive 3-card blind strategy might have looked appealing to a lot of players because being able to counter your opponent's Mox when they are playing Mox Jet, Eumidian Hatchery, and Smallpox gives you a free pass against a deck that was expected to be a large part of the meta. But there are a couple of issues here that explain why Foil had a lackluster average score despite being one of the most infamous 3-card blind decks of all time. Our other highly impactful and infamous unbanned card was Dark Depths. And because Dark Depths can operate under a 3-land strategy, it can play its game plan straight through Foil with no issues. The other element to the equation here that made Foil underperform is that Eumidian Hatchery had many different variations, some of which were resistant to Foil. Although Zurin Orb and Smallpox are ways for you to blow up your own Eumidian Hatchery that are vulnerable to Foil, Glacial Chasm and Edge of Autumn are uncounterable ways to get rid of your own land. Eumidian Hatchery could also be paired with cards that would bait out Foil, like Cecil Dark Knight, Hopeless Nightmare, or Spectre Shriek, which when paired with Zurin Orb present a no-win situation for Foil players because these pairings can be used to bait out Foil before Zurin Orb is cast. Now after hearing some of these things, you might have expected that Dark Depths at least would have done pretty well into this meta. But Dark Depths interestingly has a shared weakness with Eumidian Hatchery. which is that it is vulnerable to non-basic land disruption. So then the question ought to be, what was the strongest, most reliable non-basic land disruption that didn't leave you entirely vulnerable to something like foil? And the unfortunate answer to that question is it's still a Eumidian Hatchery deck. Eumidian Hatchery in combination with Encroach and either Glacial Chasm or Edge of Autumn is a deck that can go even against any other Eumidian Hatchery deck while beating Dark Depths and not having to worry about foil because it can pop its own Eumidian Hatchery without ever casting a spell and being vulnerable to the free interaction they have. So at this point, the meta is starting to look a bit like a rock, paper, scissors scenario, but each of rock, paper, and scissors are all a variation of a Eumidian Hatchery deck. If we look at the meta exclusively for Exemplar and Contender, which tend to be more competitive than Aspirant and Novice pods, we will see that Hatchery decks combined with Foil and Dark Depths took up a greater than 50% share of the meta. And if Hatchery was a different type of card than the one it actually is, being able to target a shared weakness among those Hatchery decks would present a huge opportunity. But those shared weaknesses were few and far between, and the easiest weakness to exploit among these brings you to Encroach, which leads you right back to Eumidian Hatchery itself. Now, obviously there are a lot of interesting things in that other category outside Eumidian Hatchery, Foil, and Dark Depths, but literally none of them were able to rise above these dominant forces in the format, and we won't be discussing any of them as we go through our winners. Now, we've already touched on all of the winning decks this month in our overview of the meta, so I'm going to just blast through them here because we have many winners to cover and a lot of repeated decks. In Novice 7, we had a tie between 15 Cha-Cha, who was playing Encroach, Eumidian Hatchery, and Glacial Chasm, and MTG Simplified, who was playing Chancellor of the Forge, Foil, and Island. In Novice 6, our winner was Sammy 8S, who was playing Encroach, Eumidian Hatchery, and Lotus Field. In Novice 5, our winner was Mystic, who was playing Encroach, Eumidian Hatchery, and Glacial Chasm. In Novice 4, we had a tie between Simic Oracle, who was playing Edge of Autumn, Encroach, and Eumidian Hatchery, and Tappy, who was playing Cecil Dark Knight, Eumidian Hatchery, and Zurin Orb. In Novice 3, our winner was Median Orange, who was playing Eumidian Hatchery, Glacial Chasm, and Inquisition of Kozilek. In Novice 2, we had a tie between Armor Crow and Bishop, who were both playing Cecil Dark Knight, Eumidian Hatchery, and Zurin Orb. In Novice 1, our winner was Dawn Runes, who was playing Encroach, Eumidian Hatchery, and Glacial Chasm. In Aspirant 4, we had a tie between Ember and Orange Knight, who were both playing different Dark Depths lists. Both were using Dark Depths in Thespian Stage, and Ember was using Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, and Orange Knight was using Crystal Vein. In Aspirant 3, our winner was Fallen Angel Viox, who was playing Cecil Dark Knight, Eumidian Hatchery, and Zurin Orb. In Aspirant 2, our winner was Allbred, who was playing Cecil Dark Knight, Edge of Autumn, and Eumidian Hatchery. In Aspirant 1, our winner was Griffmin, who was playing Eumidian Hatchery, Spectre Shriek, and Zurin Orb. In Contender 5, our winner was Majin Buu 22, who was playing Cecil Dark Knight, Eumidian Hatchery, and Zurin Orb. In Contender 4, our winner was Jethro, who was playing Chancellor of the Forge, Foil, and Island. In Contender 3, our winner was Helix 65535, who was playing Eumidian Hatchery, Glacial Chasm, and Inquisition of Kozilek. In Contender 2, our winner was Barbuz, who was playing Cecil Dark Knight, Eumidian Hatchery, and Zurin Orb. In Contender 1, we had a 5-way tie between Doga, Fractal, Hyalophage, Malshoss, and T-Bubble, who were all playing Encroach, Eumidian Hatchery, and Glacial Chasm. And finally, in Exemplar, we had a 4-way tie. Avaloon, Drowned, and Swift Warkite 2 were all playing Eumidian Hatchery, Hopeless Nightmare, and Zurin Orb, and Zoe the Cat was playing the same deck but using Edge of Autumn instead of Zurin Orb. And now that we've powered through all of those, I do want to briefly pause here and just acknowledge the insanity that is the lineup of these winners. Out of the 17 pods, 15 of them had a Eumidian Hatchery deck take the first place position. And in virtually every pod, we had several Eumidian Hatchery decks in the top 5. For example, if we look at Exemplar, you have to go 10 decks deep before you see a non-Eumidian Hatchery deck. But before we move on to discussing bans, I do want to congratulate our new champion, Drowned, who claimed the title with an 1887 ELO rating. And it is extremely well deserved because Drowned came in the first place position in Exemplar in 3 out of the 4 past months. And I would like to congratulate all of our winners one more time before we move on to discussing the cards that will be included in this month's ban vote. Let's begin by taking a look at the recently unbanned cards, starting with the more innocuous of them. Barren Glory was recently unbanned, but it was originally banned because of its combination with Lotus Bloom, and Lotus Bloom is currently on the ban list, so there's been a bit of a switcheroo here. From my perspective, this seems like a no-brainer that the card should remain legal, but we did make a commitment to including all recently unbanned cards on the ban vote, so you can express your opinion here however you would like. Rishadan Port wasn't able to have much of an impact on this meta, in part because it has no meaningful impact on Eumidian Hatchery, Dark Depths, or Foil. It did have a couple of strong showings in combination with Felia and Dreadhorde Invasion, but the card was pretty poorly positioned this month overall. The card historically has been very impactful, so it is extremely likely that it will not be overshadowed in the upcoming months because, spoiler alert, I think we can assume that Eumidian Hatchery is going to get banned. You can use this vote as an opportunity to decide whether you would like to see Rishadan Port return to the meta in a more substantial way, or whether you'd like to just nix that before it happens. Energy Field was in a similar situation to Rishadan Port where it simply didn't fit into this month's meta. We actually didn't see the signature Energy Field deck of Sand Silos and Ulamog the Infinite Gyre get submitted this month, but we did see a Living Conundrum list do pretty well. Just like Rishadan Port, I think it's reasonable to assume that Energy Field would have a much more substantial impact on upcoming months if it were to remain legal, and I will leave it up to you to decide whether you would like to see that happen or not. Dark Depths was one of the few cards this month that was able to compete into this Eumidian Hatchery focused meta. Dark Depths and Foil were the only non-Eumidian Hatchery decks that claimed pod wins this month. If we were to ignore all of the matches against Eumidian Hatchery, it will become clear that Dark Depth's performance into the rest of the meta looked a lot better than its overall performance. It was very much held back this month by the fact that players were bringing cards like Encroach to the table as a way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, where the birds were Eumidian Hatchery and Dark Depths. Dark Depths is by no means an unstoppable strategy, but its resistance to normal types of interaction and its ability to close out games incredibly quickly makes it a card that I would be concerned about remaining legal in upcoming months. Our final unbanned card was Chancellor of the Forge, but we can't talk about Chancellor of the Forge without also talking about Foil. Chancellor of the Forge was the card that actually got unbanned, but in a lot of ways it feels like Foil was also unbanned because it was essentially unplayable without this pairing. The Foil deck was the most popular deck this month, and similarly to Dark Depths, Eumidian Hatchery masked just how effective it was. If we ignore the Eumidian Hatchery decks, Foil pulls a completely respectable average score, which begins to look even more appealing if we eliminate the Dark Depths decks from the equation. Now there are other Chancellor of the Forge based strategies. For example, it can be paired with Fury or Pyrokinesis, both of which have been pairings that were dominant in past metas. For that reason, we're giving you the option to vote on Chancellor of the Forge and Foil independently of each other, so that you can decide whether you would like those alternative Chancellor of the Forge decks to stick around by leaving that card legal, or you can vote to ban both to eliminate a large chunk of zero-cost interaction from the format, or you could leave them both legal. That being said, I do think if you want Chancellor of the Forge banned, you really ought to also vote to ban Foil as a safety precaution in case the vote doesn't go as intended. Our next card on the ban vote is Eumidian Hatchery, and there isn't much to say here that hasn't already been said. this should be a slam dunk ban because this was one of the most warped metas we've ever seen, and it is clearly this card that is the culprit. And I'm going to explain the remaining 3 cards that were part of this month's ban vote all at once here because they have something in common. Encroach, Cecil Dark Knight, and Smallpox are all cards that in their own right are very strong, but there is no question that their prevalence and strength this month was riding off of their ability to be played in tandem with Eumidian Hatchery. I certainly don't think these 3 cards are entirely free of guilt, but I do advise that you use your best judgment to consider how effective these cards will be in future months with Eumidian Hatchery out of the equation. So that is our extremely robust list of cards that you have the opportunity to ban for the upcoming tournament in September. Remember that you can cast your vote by visiting the website, which will be linked in the description of this video. And to wrap up here, I just want to acknowledge that this is nothing like a typical month of 3-card blind, which in a lot of ways was really exciting, but I am hopeful that a lot of the newer and returning players that joined this event and made it our highest turnout of all time will stick around for September to see something that looks a little more like a normal month of 3-card blind. Either way, I want to thank everyone so much for participating in this month. It was super exciting to see so many players dive deep into this wacky and one-of-a-kind meta. Thanks for watching, everyone, and see you soon.